Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh no. So many reasons why I want it for you, my love. Now you all want to retire with my love, yeah. Just be desolate. Hello guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Abiola, and in today's tutorial we'll be taking the sewing version of the last tutorial I posted. If this is your first time here, you need to go and watch the cutting part of this tutorial before you watch this one. I'll have it linked in the description box as well as the comment section. So let's get straight into the video of today. For the sake of beginners amongst us, I'm going to show how I cut on fabric. What I'm going to do is to place my fabric on fold and then place my front skirt pattern on that fabric that I have placed on fold. I'm going to cut off what I actually need, then go ahead to pin down my pattern paper on the fabric and go ahead to cut out the pattern exactly as it is, no adding of any allowance at all. The next step is to cut out the back pattern, but for this back pattern we're cutting out two pieces, we're not cutting it on fold. Okay, that's what we're going to do for the back pattern. Next is the bodice part. For the back bodice, we are going to be cutting out 4 pieces of the back bodice. So as you can see, I folded one piece of fabric into 2. I'll go ahead and fold another one into 2 because we're cutting out 4 pieces, 2 for the main fabric and 2 for the lining piece, and I want to cut everything at the same time. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead to place my back pattern on top of it now and proceed to cut out. At this point, guys, I made a mistake and I'm going to tell you that mistake so that you do not make it. I forgot to add 0.5 inch seam allowance at the back opening, the opening at the back. And if you notice, mine was very wide because I forgot to add the allowance and I didn't want to cut a fresh fabric. This is the part I'm talking about, the part I'm cutting at the moment. Do not forget to add your 0.5 inch seam allowance. If you notice, my own back was a bit too wide, but it was still beautiful. So to ensure that yours is not too wide, please go ahead and add 0.5 inch round that part. Now over to the cowl neck. What we're going to do first is to come down by 0.5 inch on the neckline. Okay, connect that with your curved ruler. You're going to understand everything as we proceed. After doing that, use your scissors to cut it out. Next, get your fabric and place it on fold. Fold it into 2 because we're going to be cutting the front part on fold. That is, we're cutting one piece of the front part. So after placing it on fold, I'm going to go ahead and place my pattern paper on top of it. Go ahead and pin down on the fabric. The next step is to slash and spread. From our last tutorial, we already slashed this. Now you need to spread this depending on how you want your cowl neck to fall. For me, I spread mine by 7.5 inches. As you can see, I spread mine by 7.5 inches and I went ahead to use my pin to pin it down at that point so that I do not make any mistake. Guys, if you do not want yours to fall as as much as mine, you reduce it, use 7, use 6. But if you want it to fall more than mine, you can go ahead and use 8, 9. But just know, the more your cowl neck falls, the more your breast will be showing. Okay, from that your neckline, go ahead to draw that into a straight line so that it touches the center front. So that is it basically. So we're going to go ahead to cut out now. At this point, it is as easy as ABC. At this point, guys, please pay rapt attention. We're going to adjust our cowl to our preference. For me, I would like my cowl to fall in a curvy manner, not this way it's looking. So I'm going to try to get a curve from the shoulder to any point at this point. As you can see, just do exactly what I'm doing. I will do the same thing just to get like a curve. If you notice, my cowl neck had this nice drop from the shoulder line, and that is why it has that. So I'm going to go ahead to cut this off right now. And to ensure that it is equal, you can use what you cut from the first side to cut out the second side. I mean, as a pattern. Okay, so this is it basically. As you can see, it has a very lovely shape. The next thing we're going to do now is to cut out a facing for the front part. Okay, because we're going to be turning the armhole and we're going to be turning the neckline. So I'm going to go ahead now to trim out a facing for the front pattern. As usual, do not forget to pin, then proceed to cut out. Okay. The next step is to ensure that the facing is straight. Okay, as you can see, the one I cut out is not straight. So what I did was to measure what I had at this point, which is about 1.5 inches. I went ahead to measure the same 1.5 inch at this other side. Then I connected that with a straight ruler and I cut out. That will make sure that it is straight. And I made it 1.5 inches because I would be hemming that part, and I would also use my hemming gum to hold it together with the main fabric so that it becomes one piece. I hope that is explanatory. The next step is to head over to the sewing machine and stitch the neck area using 0.25 seam allowance. After stitching the neck area, proceed to top stitch. Okay, after top stitching the neck area, you can now go ahead to stitch the armhole area. You stitch this way and you stitch the second armhole, but I'm not stitching the shoulder area. If you notice I did not point at the shoulder area, then do not forget to hem this place the way I'm showing you. Hem it, because we're going to use hemming gum to hold it together with the fabric, or you can just use hemming gum to hold it if you don't want to hem it before you use the hemming gum. Okay, now let's proceed to the back part. The back part, remember, we have 4 pieces, 2 for the main fabric and 2 for the lining piece. So what we're going to do is to place them right sides facing each other. I realized that they were not properly arranged, so I had to arrange them. So place them right sides facing each other and go ahead to stitch the neckline using 0.25 seam allowance. Now if you added 0.5 inch to your back, use 0.5 inch to stitch your back. I mean, if you added the allowance whilst cutting, because if you remember, I told you I did not add mine. Then stitch the armhole area using 0.25 as well. Okay, I have gone ahead to stitch mine, and at this point I am notching every angle that I have stitched so that when I flip it to the right side and iron, it lays nice and flat. Okay, so guys, the next step is to create the buttonhole. Okay, this is something we should have done before joining the neckline and closing the back, because it will be easier. I realized that at this point. That's why I told you guys to watch to this part before you attempt that step. You can decide to use your fabric to create the buttonhole, but for me, I'm going to be using this string. It is what they use for buttonholes, for ready to wears and all of that. Just ask for it in the market and they will give it to you. So I cut out 2 pieces of that, about 1.5 inch in length. So what I'm going to do is to fold it into 2, or fold it in half, and place it from underneath like this. That's why I said we shouldn't have stitched the neckline and the back hole before putting it in. I mean, we should have put it in first. That's what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm going to place the first one and I'm going to pin it down, and I'm going to put the second one as well and pin it down, then head over to my sewing machine and stitch using 0.5 inch allowance, because that's what I added whilst we were drafting. I hope you remember that part. Like I mentioned, I'll go ahead to stitch using 0.5 inch allowance. I'll also stitch this part using 0.5 inch as well. I've gone ahead to trim the excess allowance after stitching, and I'm going to go ahead to notch, because when you flip it over, you want it to be relaxed and you want that pointed edge to remain pointed. So I'm going to go ahead to notch every angle and cut off the excess allowance at that point. Okay, Also, do not forget to trim off every excess allowance at the pointed edge that I'm showing you guys right now, because that will help it remain pointy when you flip it to the right side. The next step is to flip this to the right side. Do not forget to use your scissors to poke the edge so that it comes out. Like I mentioned earlier, cut off the allowance. But I've noticed I had to flip it back to the wrong side and trim very well so that everything comes out pointed. Okay, then I will go ahead to flip it back to the right side and go ahead to I also used my ruler to also poke it out because it wasn't coming out the way I wanted. Then after everything, I'll proceed to my ironing table to iron. After ironing, to ensure that it lays flatter, I went in with my hemming gum to put at all the edges, okay, and I went ahead to use my iron to hold it down so everything was properly pressed. Even at that button area, I put the hemming gum there and I ironed it well, as you can see, so everything came out to be very, very flat. Please guys, take your time to carry out this ironing step because it makes a whole lot of difference. Okay, so after doing that, I'll go ahead to mark my dart or my skirt part. Guys, I'm working with a dart length of 5 inches and I'm taking a 1-inch dart. My nipple to nipple is 7 divided by 2 is 3.5. So I'm just going to go ahead to mark my dart and go ahead to take it in. I don't want this video to be too long at all. Also, you can go ahead to transfer your dart from your paper to your fabric. Like I mentioned in my last video, Vivian OKEKE has a detailed tutorial on transfer of dart from paper to fabric and everything about that in general, which I'll have linked in the description box below. So check it out to be able to draft. But I'll still show you how I did mine though. So guys, here is the front bodice pattern. I have flipped it to the right side and I have ironed it as well. I used my hemming gum to hold the neckline. I also used the hemming gum to also hold the armhole. Then for the facing, as you can see, it has become one piece with the main fabric. That's because I also used my hemming gum to hold it in place after hemming. Okay, so here's what everything looks like. It's looking really neat. So what I'm going to do at this point now is to join the skirt pattern to the bodice. In order to do that accurately, I'm going to take the midpoint. I'm going to find the midpoint of the skirt pattern and I'm going to notch it with my scissors. Then I will go ahead to find the midpoint of the bodice and also notch with my scissors. Then I'm going to go ahead to place them right sides facing each other, midpoint matching midpoint, and I'm going to use my pin to hold them in place. Okay, and I'll head over to my sewing machine to stitch it down using 0.5 inch seam allowance. For the back parts, also place them right sides facing each other, just like you see me doing, and go ahead to pin them down. Head over to your sewing machine and stitch using 0.5 inch seam allowance. I'll also do the same thing for the second side. Here is the back parts when I was done joining them. Now it's time to mark out my zipper allowance. My zipper allowance is 1 inch, so I'll proceed to mark 1 inch from beginning to the end. Okay, what I'm going to do now is to measure where I want my slit to start from. Okay, so I'm going to measure from the waistline to about 22.5 inches. That is where I want my slit to start from. Now I'm going to go ahead to pin pin before I head to my sewing machine to stitch. I'm going to pin everything, especially the waistline, so that everything aligns. You don't want a situation whereby you fix your zip and one is up, one is down. No, we want everything to align. So that is the essence of pinning together. I've gone ahead to stitch the two of them, and I've also ironed the zipper area, and here's the zipper I'll be working with. Now I'm going to mark out where I want my zipper to stop. So from the waistline, I am going to measure 10.5 inches. That is where my zipper is going to stop. So I'll go ahead to fix my zipper. I'm going to open to the point where I marked. Please use your seam ripper or your razor blade. Don't rip your fabric like me. Go ahead to back stitch at that point that I just showed you guys, then fix your zipper. Then after that, go ahead to join the shoulders using 0.5 inch seam allowance. I went ahead to pin the shoulders and also the sides before heading to my sewing machine to sew. At first, I went ahead to join the sides using 1 inch seam allowance. If you remember from our pattern drafting, we added 1 inch seam allowance to the bodice part as well as the skirt part. But when I was done joining, I didn't like the fit. It wasn't as snug as I would have loved. So I went ahead to mark out 1.5 inch instead from beginning to the end, and that gave me the lovely fit that I wanted. So basically I used 1.5 inch seam allowance to stitch it down from beginning to the end. Now let's work on the slit. For the slit part, I would advise that you go and weave your cloth. When you are done weaving the cloth, then you can now stitch the slit in a very neat manner. The places you're going to stitch is what I'm marking. You stitch the top part, then you stitch the sides down. I feel like it will look neater if you have weaved your fabric. If you don't want to stitch it, like you don't want any stitch lines to show, you can go ahead to use your hemming gum to just hem it, and it will look really nice. You know, people will be wondering how did you stitch it and there are no stitch lines. So you can put your hemming gum underneath. Go ahead to also hem the base of your dress. You can hem it using your sewing machine or your hemming gum. The last step is to put in your button using your needle and thread. And with that, we've come to the end of this tutorial. Do not forget to hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you in the next one.